You're listening to Startup Universe Talks, a podcast where we meet with startup founders, angel investors, and major stakeholders of the startup ecosystem. They let us in on the do's and don'ts of running a startup, their career story, and the process of succeeding as well as failing. In other words, everything of interest to startup nerds. Startup Universe is a massive network of opportunities for EU tech startup founders, connecting them with the best minds of the EU tech community, with unicorn founders, known investors, and experts. We have brought together European countries to join forces and launch startup programs suitable for their nation's tech founders. ESU aims to give access to opportunity for funding and expansion across EU countries. This is Startup Universe Talks. I am Maritza, and today I am here with Enis Hulli, the general partner at 500 Istanbul. Welcome.
Hey Maritza, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So, can we just begin by, can you tell me, some of the viewers, I'm assuming they already know, but some maybe not. So can you tell me about 500 Istanbul?
Of course, let's start off with 500 Global first. So 500 Global used to be an accelerator in SF. They started back in 2010, and over the past 11 years, we have invested into more than 2,700 companies across 75 countries all around the world. And after 2015 onwards, we started building these regional focused funds, focusing on places like LATAM, Southeast Asia, MENA, or Turkey. And we lead the Turkey and Eastern European operations within 500. So we raised our first fund. It was a small $10 million vehicle back in 2016, and we invested into 40 companies, mostly in Turkey and 25% in Eastern Europe. Last year, we raised our second fund. It's a 50 million euro vehicle. This time it's domiciled in the Netherlands, again, focusing on Eastern Europe and Turkey. And obviously, going from a 10 million fund to a 50 million euro fund, we have increased our ticket size. Our average ticket size would be 750K to a million. And we really like to invest into idea stage companies, very pre-seed, no prototype, no traction. I think that's our sweet spot.
Okay, what makes it the sweet spot? Can you explain?
Yeah, I think we're optimizing for founder profile. And as we optimize for founder profile to make sure that we can enter these companies at okayish valuations where we can easily get 5 to 10%, even more, sometimes 15% ownership, has to be pre-seed. Even seed in these really top profile founders would be way too late for us, because the seed rounds these days for A+ founders are somewhere between 20 to 30 million seed rounds, which is not something we can do given that we're only a 50 million euro fund. So given that our decision mechanism is really founder-led and we optimize for founder profile, we had to de-optimize for traction and product, believe that if we can pick the best founders out there, the top 0.1%, if not top 0.01%, then they can easily build that prototype, get that easy traction, and there's much less risk there. The problem here is obviously it's an access game. So there's information asymmetry, there's access symmetry. It's tough to find those founders and make sure that they want your money instead of any other venture capital funds money. And that's where we go into the competition. But I think if you're going for top founders, then you have to go idea stage pre-seed. Otherwise, in this whole globalized world, it's very tough to get on seed or Series A.
Yes. So how do you find, like, what kind of qualities do you look for in the top founders?
There's no one founder profile where like, this is the founder profile that we invest in. It can be a variety of them. And VCs, I think, are really bad at pattern matching. So we try to match these patterns. We have, for example, 4 different pattern of great founders, and then we miss on a bunch of deals and we're like, oh shit, maybe there's a 5th pattern as well. Happens a lot. But in the founders that we back, we really look for them to be uniquely positioned in whatever industry they're going after. So that unique position can come from domain expertise, can come from network, can come from wherever they were located and what they want to do. But that unique position is very important. And I think the second part would be founder awareness, because not every founder has the same profile. Some founders are really good at 2 things, but they lack 5, 6 other things. Some founders are more well-rounded. They're good at a lot of things, but they're not very good at one thing. Both of these founders can become successful as long as they have awareness of where they fit. For example, for the founder profile who's really good at a couple of things, but really lacks all these other functions, it's important for them to build a senior leadership early on. Whereas for more well-rounded founders, they can stay as leading a lot of the functions early on, but over time they need to get to best of the best in a lot of these functions, which means they have to hire people who are better than them in all of these certain functions that they have. I think it comes from domain expertise, which makes them uniquely positioned, and then founder awareness, so that they know what they're good at, they know what they lack.
Okay. Do you feel like sometimes that the feeling you get when you're meeting with the founder, that can influence how like maybe you get swept away with you liking the founder?
It does a lot, and I think there are a lot of biases that are in play there. For example, a founder who comes from an investment banking consultancy background speaks your language way better than a technical founder, because he or she has been doing that for the past 5 to 10 years. So he or she is better at building narrative, having an intelligent conversation, looking at the market on a macro perspective. All of these things are great, but that similar to me bias is something we're trying to avoid for. Same goes for super sellers or storytellers. Obviously, it's great to be a super seller or a storyteller because it really eases your way into hiring with people, or being able to access downstream capital and fundraise from other VCs down the line, because those things are super important to become a leader. But then again, we try to look under the hood to see what's actually there, and not go into that narrative super seller bias.
What advice do you have for people who are looking for funding?
I think, first of all, the best time to raise funding is when you don't need it. So bearing that in mind, fundraising shouldn't be something that you start and you stop and you start again in 12 to 18 months, especially in the early days until Series B. If you're speaking to an investor, you're fundraising, you should always be in that mentality. And a lot of these companies who blitz scale and raise large sums of capital in a span of 12 to 24 months, they do that because of that mindset that the founder has. Eventually, the role of the founder is to remove whatever obstacle is there along the way. And initially, it might be a product obstacle, then it might be customer discovery, searching for product market fit, then it might be building a sales team. But a lot of these things, founders first do it themselves and then they delegate. Fundraising is not something like that. Fundraising becomes a bottleneck along the way at every single step of a company, and it has to be, until very late stages, founder-led. So my advice would be fundraise when you don't need it, and always be fundraising. You should always be in the fundraising mode. The third advice, I guess, would be whatever interaction you have to turn it into a binary call to action mechanism. So you have to be looking for an answer, and it has to be 0 or 1. You shouldn't let the investor park the situation, revisit in 3 months. You shouldn't give that third option. You should either get a yes or a no, because time is mostly investor's friend. And as you prove stuff, as you validate stuff, it's a supply and demand, right? The more the investors feel like you're not going to be able to, the more they feel like you're not running away, meaning you're not closing the round, the more they expect. And the more they expect, the time goes by. So you shouldn't let them park you and get watch listed. So what I would do is I would go for a binary answer, get my no rather than be parked. Definitely, that's what I would do if I was an entrepreneur. And I guess lastly, you get better as you talk. I mean, practice makes perfect, obviously. And I see a lot of founders where after a couple of years trying to do pre-seed, seed, Series A, fundraise, etc., they have this one magical moment where after they're like, okay, now I know what I'm doing, because they become better sellers. And eventually fundraising is also a selling game, right? You're trying to sell your story as a founder and your company. And once they reach that moment, then fundraising ends up becoming a bottleneck. Fundraising is something that follows as long as you build traction, the team and the product. So practice makes perfect. So I would do much more investor interactions, but I wouldn't do long investor interactions. I wouldn't do 10 calls with this one fund, but I'd rather do 1 call with 10 funds. It increases my chances of getting them down the line. B, increases my options, which is important. Supply, demand, valuation. It really depends on the option, how many options you have. And then it's easy for you to try to get binary answer from all of them, because there's just so many of them. You're not dependent on just 1 or 2 of the investors that are in your pool.
Okay. What would you say is the preferable way to go? Is it reaching out to you, or is it the other way around, you reaching out to the startups?
Obviously, the best is investors coming to you, you not going to them. And to build that, you have to be able to build a great product, have great team, be able to build exposure, be on Product Hunt, be on GitHub. If you're a developer tool, make sure that your GitHub stars are good enough. and investors obviously pick those, right? So all of these external signals that you can build, whether on Product Hunt or hiring great people, or on GitHub, for example, is how we pick them. But let's go through our fund. For example, back in 2021, we've screened about 5,600 companies overall in 1 year in Eastern Europe and Turkey. Out of these, let's say 5,500 companies, we've had initial meetings with 1,500 of them. We had second meetings with 700 of them. We investing into 10 of them. Out of that funnel of more than 5,000 companies, I would say 85% of them, we go outbound, we find them. It's not like the entrepreneurs come apply to us or send an email or send a LinkedIn message and we start the interaction. That's only 15-20% of the time. And if you look into the number of companies that we deep dived, meaning we at least had 3 calls, we looked into their customer profiles, we looked into their metrics, etc. So we probably deep dived about 130 companies. And I would say out of that 130, probably only 2 of them were inbound, so startups coming to us. Like all the rest, more than 90% of them was us going to startups or us getting referrals from other VC funds or partners that we have in the region. So going from that line of thought, I think A would be make sure investors come to you, build that exposure, both as a founder, because a lot of these are founder-led, right? So your profile, your exposure online actually matters for you to be foundable and discoverable for venture capitalists. So that would be option A. Option B, if you're not able to do that, then obviously go with warm intros. Warm intros work in this industry, and people vouching for other people are very important, especially if it's coming from another founder. So whoever VC that you're trying to reach with, I'm pretty sure that if you go to the LinkedIn, that you would have a lot of mutual friends, a lot of mutual connections that can provide introductions. So instead of going cold call, emailing people or getting people's personal emails or LinkedIn messaging people that you don't know, make sure to get introductions. And that's what we suggest our portfolio companies do as well.
Yeah, that is some really great advice. What would you say is some red flags when talking to investors? Is there some clues to know if they are asking for too much rights and things like that, things to keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of rights, obviously on pre-seed and seed, you want to limit those rights. But if you came to a rights discussion, what rights the investor wants, it's a good signal that it's actually serious. There's almost a term sheet in place. Those rights, I think pre-seed, seed, getting board right, or a lot of board veto rights would be red flags in my mind. A lot of protective provisions or budget approvals or being able to hire or fire C-level people, getting all those rights, all those governance rights as an investor would be red flag. For example, we make sure in our term sheet and in our SHAs or the safe agreements that we do in the US, we make sure that we have all of our financial rights governed. So all of our financial rights have to be protected, and that's our fiduciary duty. But from a governance perspective, we try to give full ownership to the entrepreneur, full flexibility full flexibility to the entrepreneur so that they do whatever they want with the company. We shouldn't be actually governing the company on their behalf. We should just be there to help them. We should be cheering from the sidelines, and that's it. So I would say any right that they want would be a red flag. What's important is not to identify the red flags when you're discussing terms, because then again, if you're discussing terms, you're at the very late stages of the discussion, which is good. It's a positive signal. I think it's more important to identify those red flags on the earlier discussions so that they won't take up a lot of your time. And things that I would ask for would be, oh, have you closed the fund? When have you closed the fund? What's the fund size? How many investments are you going to make? How many have you made? What's your follow-on policy? What's your timeline like? Do you invest after 2-3 calls, or is this more like 3 to 6 month process? So make sure that I really like entrepreneurs who initially in our first meeting, at the end of the meeting, they're like, hey, do you have 5 minutes for me to ask you questions? And then they start blasting these questions, A, to qualify us as a fund, what kind of value that we add, B, to qualify our process, which is more important so that they make sure it's not a soul draining process.
Okay. Can you share some other green flags that founders do in those kind of meetings?
Yeah, some founders, not a lot of them, but some of the experienced founders, after that interaction, since they're giving a lot to you, they're giving all their information, they're going to give a data room, you're going to ask for customer introductions, etc. They make sure to take something from you as well. And it's also a good way for them to qualify you as an investor. So they might ask, hey, for example, if it's just a couple million round where we can lead, they're like, okay, if you lead, who would you like to have with you? Who do you think is a good VC who might be interested in this space? They do that, A, to qualify us, B, to ask for an introduction, eventually get those names whom we think are relevant. Same for angels. Sometimes they ask, oh, so we're doing a dev tool. For example, we're doing a no-code or a low-code dev tool. They're like, which angels do you think would be relevant for a low-code dev tool? Like chipping in 25K, 50K, doesn't matter. Who would you refer us to? Who do you think would be relevant? So that way they understand whether we actually know the market and we know some people that we can refer or not. So I really like the founders who are resourceful and who are trying to get the most out of that one interaction, because it also shows their character. You know, if they're trying to get a lot from us, that means that's what they do on a daily basis. After every single call that they have, they're looking at this one person and this one call to see, okay, what else can I get from him or her?
Okay. I can imagine that is like an important quality to want to have in the people that you invest in.
Yeah, founders have to be resourceful. I think resourcefulness, seeing those shortcuts to a result, it's very important. You know, it also brings luck. You know, like the way Naval says, there are 4 kinds of luck, and obviously the one of them, the second one that Naval mentions, is the kind of luck where someone is doing a lot of things. They're shooting a lot of shots, so some of them stick, right? And being resourceful shows that founder is actually taking a lot of shots. He or she's taking shots here and there, 24 hours a day.
Okay, yeah, that's a perfect note to end it on. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
You've been listening to Startup Universe Talks. If you want to know more about us, go to thestartupuniverse.org and follow us on social media. Thank you for listening.